So today we have AJ here, the lovely AJ, and the reason she's talking us today about loss is she's actually has a decade of pro international tennis athleticism behind her, including 3 years of college as well on top of that. So she was traveling around the world, competing professionally. And the idea of that obviously is to win or to succeed. But in order to do that, you really have to go through losing again and again and again, like any other professional sport. It's just part of it. In fact, there's more of that than there is winning, of course. So really what we want to learn is how can we deal with losing in our day-to-day? And Alex is going to share some of her stories and experiences and techniques about what she's learned through her career and how we could apply that now, especially when our world is turned upside down, like I've mentioned. And so hopefully we can walk away with something around that. And again, just a reminder, if you could please answer the polls, because we'll be talking about those. And just let us know what you're looking to get out of today in the Q&A, as we'll be addressing that, and what experiences you've had recently around losses. But apart from that, AJ, I'm going to hand over to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Samantha, Joseph and Emma as well, and the rest of the Sterning family for all of your help in putting this talk together. And for everyone that's joined today, as Samantha said, please feel free to ask as many questions as you want. We'll try to obviously get to them. Obviously would love that little bit of feedback just to see what you really want to get out of today's topic. And feel free to ask any questions at all. I'm more than happy to share as much with you as I can. So I'd like to give a little bit more context and some background just about my history. So as Sam mentioned, I did spend 3 years playing American college tennis before spending 10 years on the professional tennis tour. And I did retire 2 years ago. And now I work for the AIRS group, which is payroll, migration and contractor management, obviously in the business development team. So tennis is truly a wonderful sport and it will always be my first love, but it's not as glamorous as you might know it as. So comparing it to, a sport, nowadays, a job nowadays, it's 100% commission based. So out of the 45 weeks of the year that you're competing, a tennis player will lose almost every week. And you might be thinking, how is that possible? You've got these athletes that are living their dreams, they're flying around the world playing tennis. So for those that understand tennis, it makes sense to you, but for those that don't, tennis, a tournament may last, a week, possibly up to 2 weeks. So to win the tournament, you usually need to win 7 or more matches, depending on the size of it. So you actually get paid depending on which round you reach in a tournament. So if you lose first round, you'll barely make anything, basically. And that's the thing, is that for most of my life, losses have been incredibly frequent, but I was still able to be very successful. So today I'm going to talk to you about, what I learned on tour and how I've applied it to my professional life and some pointers that you may wish to apply to yours. As I said, feel free to keep the questions coming along. So my first point today is that frequency of losing is not proportional to success. And I'm going to start by sharing this Michael Jordan video with you.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
So obviously Michael Jordan is one of the greatest athletes of all time, and that's his summary of losing in a nutshell. But I did touch on it just a minute ago, how often I lost in tennis, and it's crazy when you think that, you know, almost every week of my professional career that I competed, I shook my opponent's hand and said good game and walked away having lost. There was, of course, those really good weeks where I did walk away with like my name on the trophy, and obviously those are amazing memories, but they were definitely, you know, not as frequent as you might expect. But for me, growing up, my father and my coach always pushed me to play those bigger tournaments. So I did take a lot more losses, you know, when I first turned pro, because I was constantly trying to chase those bigger events. So the losses were more frequent, but also the opportunities were as well. So at the start of the talk, we asked a question. If you never lose, do you ever win? So I'm just going to have a little chat around that and see, you know, what your feedback has been.
So can you see the poll there, Alex?
Yes, I can. So it seems like we have a very strong percentage towards the answer no. We've got a few that have voted yes. So I'm going to just dive into that a little bit more because, you know, I think it's a really interesting concept. You know, I'm going to rephrase the question for you, and it's, you know, are you putting yourself in a position to win or to run into bigger opportunities, as I did as frequently as I could in my career? And, you know, I think the thing is that, you know, for me as an athlete, I had to constantly lose, which I'll touch on more, to obviously learn more about myself and proceed in my career. But I feel like now, you know, my professional life, that the losses have definitely been frequent. And each time we have a setback, it actually does open another door, you know, for me. And I know that today I'm talking to a lot of you guys. Some of you may be, you know, in the recruitment industry or candidates looking for new roles. And I think especially, you know, in my field in business development, you're constantly, you know, coming across new leads, new clients. And for those candidates looking for new roles, you're coming across, you know, new job opportunities. So they're the kind of, you know, opportunities that I want to touch on, because, you know, you're putting yourself in a position to win a new job or win a new client, but you're also potentially that you might lose that client or you might lose that job opportunity. But I think at the end of the day, you need to see it as, if you're facing that opportunity, you have a chance to win. So it's got to be in it to win it, as, you know, as that cliche saying goes.
We love a good cliche, AJ. We love a good cliche there.
Yeah, I know, right? We'll get to something a little bit more, you know, specific. It was actually Serena Williams that said herself, and I love this quote, especially from her, who is no doubt one of the greatest female athletes of all time. I've grown most not from my victories, but from setbacks. And I mean, she was able to, and still is, being able to be the top of women's tennis for, you know, we're talking over a decade. She's also a mother, which I might obviously, to come back to such a high level of sport after that, she has to be so mentally and physically strong to achieve that. And I think, you know, if that's how she sees setbacks, there is no reason that we can't, you know, as well, in whatever field that we may be.
And AJ, do you think that who is your favourite tennis celebrity to follow? I mean, is she one of
the $1 million question, eh, Sam? So my favourite growing up was Justine Henin-Hardenne, who was a player from Belgium. I loved how modest she always was, and she was such a fighter. How about you, Sam? Who's your favourite?
Oh, you, AJ, definitely. I don't know. I can't pick one, but I do love the Serena, the Williams girls. I think that more outside of their tennis, they really stand up for what they believe in. And so I think that all rounded, they make a really strong character, and they're really great role models in lots of ways. So I like those aspects, as well as the fact that they're strong tennis players.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go past them. I think both of them have done degrees while playing sport as well, which I just think shows that, you know, being an athlete, you have to have other facets of yourself to you know, I'm not just a tennis player. I think Serena's done a degree in fashion design. So there's other parts of her that make her who she is. And I think that just shows that, you know, to have those multifacets for her, that, you know, now that she's a mum, that her life after tennis is really set up for her, regardless if she wants to stay in the field of tennis, which I think says a lot about her as a person.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and it shows, you know, that the extent of what we're capable of. You know, we are within our own environment a product of our own limitations. So if you think in a limitless way, then most is achievable, or anything can be. So it's
Absolutely.
strength of character.
Absolutely. So I think that's, you know, if you are learning from, you know, each loss and each setback, you will, you know, in fact, still be winning and training your natural resilience. And I think obviously that's what Serena's done over so many years, is she's really trained her natural ability to bounce back after each loss. And, you know, and I think applying that to our lives as well, you know, if you don't face opportunities, you won't be able to grow and improve in yourself. There's always that, you know, you've got to test yourself to see how much you've learned, kind of thing. And obviously putting yourself in a position to be prepared for greater opportunities.
Great. Can you hear me, Alex?
Yeah, all good.
I feel like I've frozen again. Sorry, my screen just cut out. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's really great that you have these influences in life, and obviously, you know, someone that we can all relate to as well. Yeah, great.
Fantastic. I'm going to jump in to the next slide. There we go. So growing up playing tennis, my parents would always ask me if I lost a match, why did you lose? In fact, it was actually my grandma's favourite question when I called her from whatever country I was in to tell her that the match obviously wasn't, you know, so great. And she would always reply, you know, in her very stern, you know, voice, well, AJ, you must work harder. And my answers usually ranged from like, I didn't execute my plan very well, or maybe I got too emotional on the day. And it was quite funny when I was preparing for this talk a few days ago, I actually had a memory pop up of a final that I lost in Israel 3 years ago. And it's a pretty relevant story to this specific point about analysing a loss, because I'd had a really good lead up to the final. I was playing really good tennis. It was exceptionally hot over there, but having come off the Aussie summer, I was probably more prepared for those conditions than I was most of the European players that had obviously had their cold winter. And I was perhaps a little bit too confident going into the final. And warming up for the match, and all of a sudden we were, you know, the tournament was actually northern Israel, so it's quite, you know, right near the desert, and the huge desert winds that had been quiet all week picked up, and I definitely mentally wasn't prepared for, you know, that spanner in the works to, you know, to be thrown. You know, looking back at it now, if I had potentially, you know, said to myself in the match, right, AJ, calm down. This is not obviously the way you expected the match to go, but, you know, let's just adapt and be resilient. And I was saying to Sam earlier, you know, I do still do a little bit of tennis coaching on weekends because I obviously still really love the game. And with my 3 students, I always ask them, you know, if they do hit a ball out or they do lose a match, you know, I always ask them, why did that ball go out, or why did you lose that match? Before I give them like one bit of feedback, I make sure that they answer that question and practice that self-analysis, because I think that self-analysis is incredibly important. And for parents out there, it's something I do really personally recommend. Is I was taught to answer that question about my match from a very young age. And it's teaching kids to figure out, you know, why something went wrong before you give them any advice. Because you can't, you know, obviously you can't go through life thinking, you know, that every loss is out of your control, because there's always elements, you know, that you can control. Especially that final that I lost in Israel, you know, my opponent did play really well that day considering the conditions, but there was obviously elements, including what's between my ears, that I could have controlled better.
That's really great, AJ. I like the story there, that because it gets you in the moment, especially, and knowing that you could just move on or really reflect on what's going on and be able to make the difference. You were very conscious in that mind, and I think the points that you've written here on the screen, particular points that I'm sure you'll go through, that give somebody practical ways and tangible, actionable ways to actually be in their head and to deduce a different outcome as well.
Yeah, exactly, Sam. So there are a few questions that I do ask myself nowadays, and I'd love, I'm going to go through these, but I'd love, while I'm going through them, if anyone would love to add something that you do currently in your professional lives or in your job role at the moment, that you use to analyze, if something didn't go so well. That'd be great, because we'll have a little discussion of them. So the 4 questions I like to ask myself are, did I try plan A, B, and C? So in tennis, that's basically like plan A is how you'd love to play every match. You're playing your game, playing how you practiced. B and C usually rely on your opponent a little bit more. So I guess now in business development, it's, which way did I go about contacting this client, obviously approaching them, and obviously the solution I presented to them. For those that are seeking, jobs, maybe, how you approached a new client, how you prepared for the interview, along those lines. So the second question I ask is, did I do the required research, make the required phone calls? Which again, very straightforward, but just making sure that, I did tick off every box, that I did use my common sense, and obviously the things available to me as well.
It seems like with those first 2 points, it's how well did you really prepare beforehand, and did I put all my effort into preparing so that you would be confident enough to be able to deliver? And in hindsight, with losses, it's really important to go back and think about the steps that you executed and if there was something you missed. And I like the plan A, B, and C, because there's always a contingency. You have to be prepared for different results. And I think that's really critical to point out, that it's not just going to be option A every time. There's definitely going to be different outcomes. So you need different plans, to manage.
Especially, in this world that we live in now, that who would have ever thought that, no one ever prepared us for what 2020 was going to bring to us and bring to our lives. And I think now more than ever, you need to realize that there may be a plan D, E, F, and G that you might need to apply to whatever phase of your life that you're in. I think it's super important to do that. Number 3 is one that was very relevant to my early days in my tennis career, was, did I keep a level head throughout discussions and negotiations, or were emotions involved? And I think this is, it's so relevant to every area of life. We're human beings, and emotions are so normal and so frequent to us, but maintaining that, head sometimes over your heart, in negotiations, discussions, sometimes is very frequent. What are your thoughts on that, Sam, especially in your field?
Balancing the head and the heart aspect, is that mainly?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, it gets thrown into a box and it gets mixed up all the time. So it is definitely something that happens frequently. Look, I feel like with every situation that comes in, especially when there's some kind of loss involved, which is basically every situation that we come across, it I just go in now knowing that that's definitely the bigger percentage of potential, is that rejection or loss or not winning is the rule. And the exception is the win. So if you're prepared for that, then, the win is the bonus. That's what you aim for, in my opinion. But of course, knowing that the outcome isn't always going to be, or almost definitely is, a high percentage of losses, then you won't feel necessarily, or I don't feel, grief or sadness or or down in my own abilities or what's happened or the situation I didn't control, because I know it's mostly inevitable. So it's just a bit of a bit of a law of averages, bit of a percentage game in my head, and just not going in knowing you're not always going to win. It's mostly not, in fact.
Yeah, no, it's a good summary, Sam. And number 4 is a really, straightforward one. Did you give 100%? Can you walk away from it saying you gave it all? And I think, I'm gonna get to it, but I think it's really important in that situation. If you did walk away from it, and maybe you didn't give 100%, not to be so hard on yourself. But at the same time, obviously, every opportunity you get, you still want to give it everything you can, because you never know what you can get out of it. So I'd love to share a few of the responses that we've had. Sam, do you mind sharing them? Sorry, I can't get them up on my screen at the moment.
Okay, all right. So what we've got here is, okay, we've got one question here. What do you do to stop the internal chatter, or so to speak, I guess, the thoughts going through your head, and reset after a loss? So perhaps this is a question, or the way somebody's maybe analyzing what they do. So if you miss a point, for example, what do you do around the internal chat that's going on? But perhaps, the analysis, this is more of a question for you, I think, Alex, rather than somebody's a technique on how to manage or analyze their own loss. But what do you do? I think we touched on that before when you asked me, when you've just got these internal things going on around a loss, you've really been hit hard, you've really missed that last point that could have won you the game in your context, and how do you reset? And I think we're going to talk around this more through the next slides, but is there a quick answer to that in relation to the analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually something that my sports psychologist taught me, probably one of the first sessions I ever had, still as a junior. And I found it really, really effective throughout my whole career, and every time I was in a pressure situation, was not actually to ignore the pressure. So not to just quickly get it out of my head as quickly as possible, but it was actually to acknowledge that it was there, that you are in that situation. Obviously that things might not be going as well as you want them to, but to actually put it in a bit of a bubble. Imagine that you're putting a bubble in your brain, and you're like, okay, it's there. So it's sitting there. I know it's there. I know I'm, fighting in a 3rd round match in South Africa, and it's 100 degrees. My opponent has started playing really good tennis. Okay, it's in a bubble. It's in my brain. Now, let's divert. As you said, Sam, I will get to this, but now let's divert to what I can control, and that only. So that's really helped me to keep my brain calm. For those that maybe you're at uni, if you have that tough question, or you've got that job interview and that interviewer has thrown you that curveball, it's just a matter of being like, okay, yeah, it's a curveball, but that's all right. I've seen it before, or I've been in a position, it's a pressure situation. It is what it is. Let's put it in a bubble, and let's just answer it to the best of our abilities.
That's great, Alex. It sounds like you're talking about compartmentalizing as well. There's a box for everything. Things have an order or go into a certain place, and a lot of practice and being able to go, well, this goes into the I can control, this goes into the I can't control, or this goes into the I'm you even set a time frame for how quickly you're going to move on for something. You're very conscious of what's going on rather than it being unconscious overall.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so we might move on to the next slide. That's all right. Fantastic. Okay, so the next point I'm going to have a little chat about is maintaining professionalism and walking away from a loss. So for many years in my tennis career after a loss, especially earlier in my career, I would, ignore my parents. I'd ignore my coach, and I'd also ignore my boyfriend for sometimes hours and sometimes even days. So not only was I making the loss, bigger than life, but I was also letting that negativity take control of, my recovering body and mind. And it was really preventing me receiving that critical feedback, after a loss. And for me, I was living the dream. I always wanted to be a tennis player growing up. But each loss was eating so much into my happiness, and also obviously affecting my relationships. You know, it wasn't fair on my parents, who were potentially on the other side of the world. Maybe my coach, who was doing his best to either coach me at that tournament, or potentially he was at home back in Australia, and obviously was trying to help me as much as he could from, you know, watching the match online. So for me, you know, it was so important to learn early in my career not to let a loss hang on me for too long, because it would, you know, eat into my happiness, which, you know, is, we're all on our journeys, but we can't let, you know, our careers, especially for me at the time, but also those losses eat into our happiness, because it is such a fragile thing.
Absolutely.
Obviously for me, the more I did it, the more each match just seemed so big, rather than just another day. It's another day in my office. My office was a tennis court. And for me, that court just became bigger and scarier each time that loss became worse to me. So soon I had to realize that, you know, win or lose, there's still another tournament next week. And that was a massive victory for me internally, because I was then able to go into each match a little bit more relaxed. I could be myself on the court. I was playing my game. And it was really funny, because the more I relaxed, the faster I could move my feet. Like, adrenaline is a very strange thing in the body. And when you're relaxed, it can be amazing. But when you're tense, it can just completely completely take over your body, in a not so good way as well.
That's really interesting, AJ, and I think that it's a great point that you've realized that just because this loss in front of me right now is all that I can see, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to, you know, move on, and next week there's going to be a new challenge. And just the knowledge of knowing that you'll be moving forward, and there's some momentum, and you're not stuck in this overwhelming mental pressure. Just released it all for you, meant that you could perform at a higher a peak, basically, and therefore you were more relaxed to just get on with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you realize that? What was the thing that happened at that time for you to go, gosh, this is the mental state I want to be in now?
It was actually my mother, she's an incredibly intelligent woman, and I'm so thankful to have her in my life, because she said to me, AJ, one day, you know, if you get upset from every loss, you're going to have an incredibly long and painful career. And I think it was then and there that I really had to look back and say, you know, this is what I've wanted to do my whole life. You know, as a kid growing up, I obviously worked incredibly hard. Why do I want this, you know, burden over me? You know, and obviously if you get so tied up about a loss, that anxiety, that pre-competition anxiety, I can tell you, is horrendous. You start overthinking before the draw's even released. You know, you're worried about who you're playing. You know, weeks before, you're worried about a tournament, when instead of saying it, every new tournament is a new opportunity. So no, it was actually my mother that had to step in and pull my brain out of that space.
That's such a good point, AJ. You know, we're only in our own minds really ever, unless we're asking for feedback or getting different perspectives, or having somebody you trust that knows you, genuinely wants to help, give you that sort of advice that you might be blindsided on. You might not know, because you're really stuck in this spiral of thought, and that person who really wants to see you succeed pulls you out. It's really important to leverage off your networks, whatever they may be, to
definitely. Yeah. So Sam, it might not be, you know, someone's mum, it might be your partner, your husband, your wife, you know, or someone that you've been friends with for a really long time that you can talk to about this, because, you know, for me, it should have been really obvious, but of course it wasn't, because that's the way the brain sometimes goes. You know, we're a very stubborn species, and that's why we sometimes need that, to rely on that village that we have around us to, you know, put us in a bit of a different direction. And ultimately it had a massive, you know, effect on my career, obviously in a good way.
Yeah, awesome. And also just that you were ready to listen at that point, right? It sounds.
We won't say how long it took. Well, I'm thankful for my mother's patience.
That's awesome. We'll give snaps to Mum AJ as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Credit to her.
Thank you, Mummy. So comparing this to professional life, I think it's, you know, something that is really important, obviously, to me now. You know, if you have a loss at work, you know, should you let it take control of your private life as well? Or should you, you know, briefly talk to your partner about it or your friends and then walk away from it? And I really think that, you know, the latter is key to maintaining that critical divide between your professional and your private life, because it will also help you move on from that loss. I think, you know, there was too many times that I bundled up a loss rather than, you know, talking to my parents about it and my coach, and my boyfriend was a professional tennis player as well. So to even bounce off that sadness, you know, off him as well was so important, because, you know, we all lose, and it was just a matter of, you know, talking to them about it, receiving the advice, and then being like, okay, that's happened. My coach has obviously, you know, instated a plan, which I'll get to in a minute, but, you know, just to, you know, release it, have a moment to really feel the loss, but then, you know, to let it go, so it's not affecting the rest of, you know, the rest of your day, the rest of your evening, or your family.
Absolutely. So we've covered how we analyze the loss as a tool to help improve, but also the mental space to be in is to really just let that go as well, you know, so you can move forward. So it's a combination of learning and being mentally free so that you don't let it limit you as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So moving on a little bit, I'm quite sure your parents would have told you, you know, as a child, you know, there's nothing worse than a sore loser. And I think it applies even more today, because you never know when that client, you know, or company, or even candidate, for those in the recruitment field out there, you know, may require your services. So it's always good to, you know, leave them with a good image of yourself. And, you know, in the world of tennis, this is critical, because if you play against someone one week, you may need to practice with them, you know, another week if your coach isn't there, or to even play doubles with them. So maintaining, you know, that professionalism after a loss, you know, and walking away from a loss are incredibly important to refining the art of losing. And it's funny, one of my worst ever losses happened in a place called Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. And it was just as I had first turned professional. And I lost to a Hungarian girl, 6-love, 6-1. So for those that know tennis, that's an absolute thrashing. For those that don't, let's put it this way, it was a really bad day at the office. But I was able to kind of move on from the loss quickly enough that the next day that same girl asked me to practice with her before her next match, because her coach had to go home. You know, and that match that previous day against her, like the nerves had just rattled my body. Like it was one of those days that, you know, if I could forget, I think it would be a good thing. But, you know, it's really funny because I was able to let go of it, obviously in time to help that girl out the next day. And she became one of my greatest friends, and she was a much better player than me at the time, and she became such a mentor to me over the next few years. And it's really funny because about 4 years after that really terrible loss to her, we were in Mexico at the same tournament, and she'd lost first round and I was in a second round absolute nail biter. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 40 degrees, about 150% humidity, and I was playing a Colombian girl who was just a super tough competitor. And the Hungarian, obviously my friend, she sat there and really supported me throughout the whole match. And looking back, I don't know if I could have got through that match without having her in my box, getting me through that match. And I think in this case, that loss in Egypt, became a win for me, and I was able to really sum up the courage to move on from that terrible loss, and gain, a lifelong mentor who's undoubtedly helped me for years. And that's the thing, is we aren't able to do losses alone. So I do urge you, and anyone out there, if you do have a loss, to really reach out to your community. Keep your courage and your head high, but also don't burn bridges. There is a bad loss or a company that doesn't need you then and there, like, you never know when they will. So to always keep that, you know, in the back of your mind.
Oh, that's a beautiful message, AJ. And you know, it's a little bit like what goes around comes around, and treat others as you would want to be treated anyway. And you know, it instinctually, I guess, for all of us, we've maybe experienced that when we feel a loss, we can switch off or think negatively or behave that way as well. And it's really snaps to you, and also through your story and other people that would replicate this, to be able to put a smile on your face and go, yep, well, I'm not going to be a sore loser, and I'm going to still see the opportunities in other ways to be able to move forward. And that's gained you this friendship and this mentor and this success down the line. I mean, it could have gone the other way easily if you were sour from that and you wouldn't have had those things. So, you know, being able to, as you say, walk away from the loss, but turn it around into something else because of your attitude. Beautiful.
Yeah, and I can tell you what, Sam, I am a fierce competitor. So for me to do that, you know, losing to me is, and always was, still is, the worst thing ever. But the whole thing is that, well, it happens so often that you can't let it, you know, completely tear your life to shreds or affect that next opportunity.
Some pretty strong learnings there, and I can only imagine that, you know, that was a thrashing for you, and what you were feeling, you had to really rise up and be the bigger person to be able to accept that person as your direct competitor is now your friend as well. So
yeah,
great.
yeah. So now I'm going to shift on to you know, how to bounce back quickly, you know, and activate your resilience in time to prepare for the next opportunity. So as Sam mentioned, I do play college tennis. So college tennis is a little bit different. You have a team with about 6 people in it that play each match, and there's about 4 reserves. So when I first moved to America to play college tennis, I was, you know, meant to play number 1 in the team based on my junior career, which was a lot of expectations. But my first season there was undoubtedly the complete opposite of what it should have been. You know, for one match, I was even, you know, totally dropped out of the lineup. And it was that quicksand effect that we see in the movies, you know, one loss really led to another. And before I knew it, I was this little girl from Adelaide in Charleston, South Carolina. And my confidence and my reputation was just completely, you know, dissipating at a very quick rate. So that first season, we still made finals. And in the first round of finals, the match came down to my singles match, and you know, I fought and fought, but I ended up losing, and we went home without obviously proceeding through to the next round. So we got back to campus, and I was sitting by, you know, the athletics track there, which is, you know, part of the, you know, gridiron football field. So it's when it's empty, it's kind of like being in a massive dome. And I remember sitting there with my, you know, my head in my hands, thinking, I'm on the exact opposite side of the world to my family and all my school friends that I've now left. And this is the outcome. You know, I've let myself down, but also playing college tennis, you let your team down. You know, tennis becomes a team sport, which it's definitely different to what I'd been used to for most of my life. 4 months later, going into my sophomore, which is second season, I won the next 23 matches in a row, including a win over that opponent.
Great.
Yeah, I know. Like, you may be thinking, like, I'm sorry, what? How did that happen? And, you know, it was an absolute critical point in my career. You know, I'd just turned 18, and that feeling of letting, you know, your team down. And we were a team of all internationals, and one American. So it was, you know, this family that I'd had of my teammates, that we trained together, we'd had classes together. It was the first time I'd really been a part of a team, and I'd let them down. And it was some days that I was in a real, you know, depressed, like, what am I doing with my life? Kind of, do I go home? Do I stay here? I'd just started a biochemistry degree. And then I thought, if I put in more work than anyone else over the next 4-month season, you know, how far could I go? So I stayed on campus that summer, which is incredibly lonely because summer school is only for the kids that, you know, have to be there. You don't stay there by choice. You know, I spent hours and hours training in that South Carolina heat, you know, just working on every part of my mind and my game. And I also went to my college coach who, you know, watched me lose all those matches that first season, you know, and I got him to completely just rip, you know, my mental game and my, you know, my tennis game apart. And there was quite literally, you know, blood, sweat and tears. But it just showed that, you know, persistence and that resilience, you know, won over from excuses and blame. And I think then and there, I could have given it all away. I could have moved back home and, you know, that was it for tennis. But I really had to, you know, look at myself. And again, we're going back to that. I approached someone that definitely had so much experience, but also that had been that fly on the wall for the last, you know, 4 months or so that had so many losses. And I really think that lesson that I learned, you know, then and there in South Carolina, you know, can really be applied to outside of tennis, you know, to really feel that loss and have that moment to really acknowledge it, because that devastation of a loss can't be ignored. There's nothing that I can tell you that can stop you from feeling that devastation, you know, of a loss. But those that feel the loss is the hardest, no doubt, can bounce back the strongest. And for me, it was then, okay, let's work out a plan. Let's identify, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with my, you know, my mental side of things, physically, and obviously my game as well. And that's, you know, what I'm saying to all of you today, like, don't ignore your weaknesses. You know, persist with them until they become your strength. And to also, as I said, speak to those around you, whether or not it's a manager, another fly on the wall, or that person interviewing you. You know, if that job, you know, interview doesn't go that great, you don't get the role, there's nothing wrong with going back to that person interviewing you and asking them for feedback, because, you know, ideally, of course, that there's no harm in them being honest with you, you know, and they might give you that feedback that helps you get over the line the next interview that you have.
Really.
You know, I think it's, sorry, you guys, Sam.
I was just saying this is a great time. We've had a question from Trish O here, and because this topic is nerves, anxiety, fear, and confidence, in the story you've just told, obviously you've combated the nerves, anxiety, and fear in those moments to give you the confidence to go on. But the question from Trish is great because it's a strong point to make. How do you manage nerves when you are getting close to a win? Because she finds that the closer she gets to something she wants, the more important it becomes and the nerves increase. So, you know, it builds and builds, probably in a positive way, you know, more so, you know, though. But I think that the point is, it could be the difference between a win and a loss if it overtakes you, right?
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
Close to the win.
So I think it's a really good question, you know, Trish. And I think that's the thing, is that, you know, as I'm going to get to in a little bit, like, it's about really focusing on your plan and what you can control. And for me, nerves, there were good and there were bad nerves, which I know is it's, you know, very basic terminology, but good nerves were those kind that was like, yeah, I'm ready for this. Like, it's a natural, you know, path the body takes to generate your natural adrenaline. And I think that's the thing, is don't ever be afraid of nerves, because they're there to help you perform. But it's those bad nerves that, you know, cripple you, that stop you from, in tennis, it stops you moving, but in, you know, professional life, it might stop you talking clearly. It might cause you to really rush or say things you don't mean. And I think that's when you need to, you know, really say to yourself, like, what can I control in this situation? Like, I'm obviously here for a reason. Look back at how far you've come and how far you want to go, and realize that this is just a stepping stone in our life. You know, whatever it may be, if it is that big presentation, you know, if it goes great, awesome. If it doesn't go so great, who's going to remember in the next couple of months? Like, don't tell your boss that I gave you this advice. But life is such a huge thing. And if you see yourself in that event as just a tiny stepping block in your career, you know, maybe you'll be like, it's okay, it's good nerves. So I want to be here. I want to be achieving this today. If I don't, that's okay. We go back to the drawing board.
Oh, that's amazing, AJ. Really good advice there. I think that just knowing that this one particular event is maybe a drop in the ocean to get you to your goal, and again, sort of seeing it as a bigger picture and having that perspective to release from holding on to those nerves so much, to help you just focus on the plan, as you said, and just do the steps you need to do.
Yeah.
Are there points on this slide that come up as well with this topic?
Yep. So I'll dive into them a little bit more, so it might help answer Trisha's question a little bit more. And that's the thing, is that as a 17-year-old, moving from Adelaide to South Carolina, like, I can tell you, I was so terrified. Like, I cried the whole flight there, the whole flight Adelaide to Sydney and Sydney to America. I just bawled. And that's the thing, is where would I be now if I never got on that plane? And fear of losing or holding on to a previous loss can cripple anyone. And if that's where your nerves are coming from, you need to acknowledge that and say, well, that's okay, that's a previous loss. We need to move on from that, so you don't let it affect that next opportunity. And it's also understanding that that previous loss has given me wisdom and strength as well for this next opportunity. And too often we avoid that next opportunity because, we are thinking about that previous event that didn't go so great. So there are a few steps that I used as an athlete, and now I actually use them in my professional life, that I do recommend. So my coach said to me, as about a 12-year-old, AJ, confidence does not grow on trees, which, at the time I thought, well, that's not fair. I thought I could just grab a bottle of it. That's all I need. And unfortunately not. So as Mark Spitz said, if you fail to prepare, you've prepared to fail. So preparation is key. You can build your own confidence with good preparation. And I think it's a really good thing as well to help counteract your nerves, is with good, hard-earned confidence.
I know we've covered that before, AJ, and it keeps coming up, but it seems really key, doesn't it, in having that feeling of confidence, is if you know what you're doing before you go and you feel prepared. From your experience, you're saying that gives you the ability to, just to be in the moment and to execute that plan.
Yeah, exactly. The next one I always like to ask myself is, do I understand the whole situation, the whole scenario? Have I read all the requirements? And do I need to ask any further questions or further clarification? So I think that's the thing, is that if you don't understand something completely, you really should go back to whoever's given you the task, or ask those around you to really clarify it. So then you can execute a really clear plan of attack. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is to ask yourself, why am I nervous? As I've just briefly touched on. If you, as I said, if you make a mistake in a presentation, who is going to remember down the track? I think about some of my absolute worst. They were my worst losses of all time, and they meant so much to me at the time. They affected how I saw myself, obviously my happiness, and as I said as well, they obviously affected me, and my recovery, and obviously my preparation for the next tournament. It's making sure that you don't let that happen, because at the end of the day, like, we're on such a long, wonderful journey of life that there's so much more going on. To not let that loss cripple you.
Yeah. And like picking your battles, even with yourself internally and with what's going on, you may win, each war, but, do you need to win the battle? And every stage matters in the whole thing. Exactly. And are the dot points coming up, AJ, so we can see what?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, there they are. Let's help.
And sorry, 4th question is, how much can I control? So I've had a little table down here that shows, what, literally listing what you can and what you can't control will really help you to prepare for something. Going back to that match in Israel that I lost, that final, I couldn't control the wind. So I should have put that in a bubble and said, okay, I can't control you, but I can control my mental state. And it will also allow you to really make that clear plan of attack.
Very important. I think that's something tangible that is a takeaway that people could literally do in front of them with any situation that they're struggling with, or if they come across, something that they've lost, or they're really finding it hard to be able to manage a situation or look to succeed. It's just putting that very basic and easy rationale in front of them. What I can't control, don't even bother with, don't focus on, because you're not going to change it, but focus on the stuff you can control, because that's going to be part of that plan that you talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that the key is preparation. I know it's another cliche that don't even know who quoted it, but fake it till you make it. Well, yeah, kind of. But if there's a bunch of preparation in the background, I can guarantee you that you will really feel, confident going into it.
Great.
Fantastic. So we did obviously have another poll question at the start of the talk. So I'd love to go through those answers and just see how, get the feedback on that.
Can you see them up there?
Yeah, I think I should be able to. There we go. So what action should you avoid if you want to move on from a loss quickly? So the first answer was feel the loss before analysing it. So no one said yes to that one. Promise yourself you will never attempt it again. We had a couple of votes towards that. Stop thinking about the loss straight away. Build a rocket. Thank you for those that voted for that one. Talk to a mentor, partner or manager for feedback, and obviously accept what you can't control and focus on what you can control. So there's obviously some silly answers in there, and some answers that I hope now that you can probably see that, personally, I really don't recommend them, stop thinking about the loss straight away, because I think analysing the loss, feeling the loss as well will help you to really move on and build your future plan around it. I feel like, promise yourself you will never attempt it again. I mean, I think, there's, going back to the Michael Jordan video, even going back to Serena's quote, attempting things over and over and improving each time, I think is something, it's that clear use of persistence, use of, individual resilience is super important, because at the end of the day, we're not perfectly going to get things right all the time. And talk to a mentor, partner or manager for feedback. I think that's, that's what they're there for. I think that's a really, for me, it's been definitely a lifesaver at times.
Very good, Alex. And I think that's a really nice way to bring it back together, because we can really reflect on those. Build a rocket. I mean, sure. I mean, that works for some people. I know that Joseph loves building rockets, and maybe that's one technique that he uses, but certainly not for all of us. So that was one of the fun ones in there. But look, you've got a few quotes here behind the scenes. So they're really, really helpful. Is there any in particular that stand out to you or resonate with you that you want to share out of the bunch here?
Yeah, I'd love to, Sam, if that's okay. So there were two quotes that I always had on my bedroom wall by obviously one of the greatest, Muhammad Ali. So the first one, only a man who knows what it is like to be defeated can reach down to the bottom of his soul and come up with that extra ounce of power it takes to win when the match is even. Very obviously sports specific, but I think that's something that for those of us who've had a lot of losses in our life, and maybe especially some bad luck maybe more recently, to say that that's okay, because that's going to push me to prepare better and keep trying to really achieve what we want to in our lives.
Awesome.
And yeah, and obviously he who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. And I think, especially for me, looking back at how scared I was as a kid moving across the globe, I think if I didn't make that jump, where would I be? And I'm sure that we've all got points like that in our lives that, we think, I'm so glad I made that jump, or I went to that job interview, or, I'm certainly so happy, at AIRS that I went to the job interview here. And I know we've all got that fear that we may have, in approaching new opportunities.
That's really relevant. It's like looking at risk as an opportunity rather than something that can be crippling as well. And being okay to take that risk, knowing that it might be a loss. It just can't guarantee, you know, even when you do succeed, it could end up a loss as well on top of that. And it's, you know, it's part of risk taking really. And knowing that there's always going to be a winner or a lose to every situation. So
absolutely. And that's the thing is, sorry, Sam, you go.
Oh no, you go, sorry.
So I was just going to say, you know, we are all on our own wonderful journeys, and tennis showed me that life is so much bigger than every little event in our lives. You know, not to let those losses and failures get in the way of preparing for like the next opportunity, or of course, you know, our own happiness, because we really can't avoid losing, but we can grow and learn from each loss. So, you know, don't make excuses, don't blame anyone else, persist and give each opportunity as much as you can, because then you can, you know, walk away with a smile knowing that you gave it 100% no matter what, whether the outcome was the one you wanted or not.
Oh, wow. That's a really strong summary there, AJ, to end that. But also there's a couple of questions here. If anyone, just to end it up, wants to ask some final Q&A, please pop it in now. And AJ will be happy to answer them. But there's a couple I can see here now anyway, AJ.
Shoot away.
One person's written, when you were looking for a coach, I think, what are the 3 characteristics you look for? So you and yourself, you looking for a mentor or a coach, what do you look for to help you?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I had a few really great coaches throughout my career. And I think for me, the first few coaches I had was definitely picked by my dad. And they were just really selfless individuals that potentially didn't have the most successful career as a tennis player. They may not have been, you know, top 50 players, but they were willing to work with kind of how can I put this in the most clear way possible, that they were happy to work with me in a way that was still allowed me to be a natural athlete. It wasn't their way or the highway. And that was super important for me throughout my career, because every coach I had said, well, that's okay, because you are a separate athlete. We're not going to completely try to clone you to be the exact same as another tennis player. Everyone is different. You know, my height, weight, natural ability, it's creating an athlete from what you have. And that was really important for me. And I think now in my professional life, having a mentor or a manager, even where I work now, for someone that allows you to be yourself and progress naturally, I think is really, really important.
Very good point. And any other characteristics, or would it be that mainly just giving you autonomy to be yourself and them adapting their teaching?
I think also that someone that holds you accountable as well, no matter what. So having that real transparent relationship. You know, I had that coach that, you know, would say, and my father as well had a lot to do with that self-analysis, like that performance wasn't good enough on whatever day it was, and saying to you and asking us, they'd always put it back on me and ask yourself, like, why did that happen? Even later in life as an adult, you know, why did that happen? You know, AJ, that's really not good enough. You know, that's completely onto you. And I think that was super important, because then I avoided being okay with blaming elements that were in my control. And that's something they always directed me to, was, you know, those elements that you can control and that you should control and that really you must control.
Wow, it's like a combination of a bit of tough love, you know, because they really want to see you win, a bit of tough love, a bit of guidance, but also just giving you back the ownership of your own journey, as you say, you know, making sure that it's no one else, it's nothing external, it's you, and putting that responsibility back on you. So that's really great.
Exactly. Nothing like a bit of tough love.
Good on your parents and coaches, you know. So and there's another question here, and I think then we'll wrap up, AJ. And what I know that you were actually telling me a story about your coaching recently with a particular child, and speaking to the parents. So there's a question here about what's the best advice you have given in coaching, but maybe what's the best guidance you've given to parents around managing losses with their kids, because this is something that most parents deal with all the time anyway, you know, not your loss individually, but the loss of maybe a young person. How do you help those parents with?
Absolutely.
Right advice?
It's such a tricky one, Sam. You know, I think especially, you know, for me, I was so lucky. You know, my parents are just fantastic individuals, and I think to parents now, something that my parents always did was, if a child has lost, to say to them and really ask them, why did they think that they lost? But also to, make sure that they've got that. It's a very fine line between being too upset about a loss and not upset enough about it. And I know that with my students, there'll be days where a loss to them is not a big deal, which I think that's something you need to be firm but not too harsh with, is to let them know that, it is important that they do fight, especially in tennis, you fight to the very end of that, or in a soccer game or football game, that you fight to the very end of that match. But also to make sure that not to be too hard on themselves, because that can be really crippling for their development. I saw in tennis a lot, I had obviously individuals that I grew up with that losing to them as a child no doubt affected them, and their love for the sport was so affected. And I was so lucky because my parents were kind but also a bit of tough love kind of mixed together, that I could still love the sport and I could still keep playing the game that I was trying to play to obviously turn pro, but also that losing to me as a child was hard. Like, I didn't want to lose, but it didn't, affect me enough that I didn't want to play the sport anymore. And I know it's a fine line, but I think it's just a matter of, reminding them losing's bad, but it's really not the end of the world, and obviously asking them why they lost.
On that note, AJ, I have learned so much today. Thank you so much. And I'm going to really start applying a lot of those things in my day-to-day as well. I actually feel quite inspired. Give me the losses, give me the failures, see how I can handle it. I'm just going to handle it like a champion, but also a lot of that I can help, with advice to friends, family, colleagues, people, candidates and clients, or people within my network as well. So it's been really, really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll speak to you soon, and can't wait to start aiming towards those wins, ready for those losses.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Turning Group. Cheers.
Take care. Thanks, AJ.